Have you ever noticed how the world seems to bow before power? The way people lower their heads, force a smile, or stay silent when someone with money or influence mistreats them. It's as if wealth grants a license to belittle, to step on others, to act as if humanity itself is for sale. But life is a way of balancing things out. Sometimes it only takes one moment, one twist of fate for the mask of arrogance to be torn away and for true worth to be revealed. Comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, like, and share, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. This is the story of a man who believed his position at the top of the corporate world made him untouchable. A CEO, dressed in luxury suits, carrying the air of a king who owned not just companies, but people's dignity too. And it is also the story of a simple waiter, a man used to silence, used to swallowing insults for the sake of his job. Their paths crossed in one lavish hotel lobby, where humiliation turned into the most unexpected revelation. And when the truth came out, it wasn't the CEO sitting on the throne of power anymore. The evening had begun like any other. The city lights flickered against the glass walls of the five-star hotel, reflecting a skyline that seemed to exist only for the wealthy. The air smelled of polished marble, expensive perfume, and the faintest trace of vintage wine. This was a place where executives came to unwind, politicians came to be seen, and travelers came to feel like royalty for a night. And at the center of it all was him, Adrian Cole, the CEO of one of the fastest-growing multinational firms in the region. A man whose face often appeared on the cover of business magazines, praised for his aggressive strategies and bold decisions. He was admired by investors, feared by competitors, and envied by almost everyone who knew his story. At least, the story that money told. But what no magazine ever wrote about was his temper, his impatience, his hunger not just for success, but for domination. To Adrian, the world wasn't made of equals. There were lions and there were sheep. And in his mind, he had always been the lion. That night, Adrian entered the hotel with the swagger of someone who expected the earth itself to shift beneath his feet. He was surrounded by a small entourage, assistants, advisors, even two junior executives hoping to impress their boss by laughing at every word he spoke. The moment he stepped inside, heads turned, guests whispered, staff stood taller. Everyone knew him, or at least they pretended to. That was the power of wealth, turning strangers into admirers, even if they didn't truly admire you at all. But in the far corner of the grand lobby stood a man who did not glance up. He was arranging glasses on a tray, adjusting the position of the silverware with quiet precision. His uniform was neat but worn, his shoes polished though their leather carried the faint cracks of age. His name was Daniel, just Daniel. To the world, he was invisible. To the guests, he was nothing more than the waiter. For years, Daniel had worked in this hotel, moving between tables, carrying trays heavier than his body sometimes allowed, bowing, smiling, and vanishing like a shadow. He had mastered the art of silence, the art of listening without hearing, of being present, yet unseen. It wasn't an easy life, but it was one he endured with patience, for he knew that behind every struggle, there was a reason, a story he never shared with anyone. Adrian's voice echoed through the lobby, loud, commanding. Is this how you run a hotel? He barked when a staff member accidentally brushed against him. The poor man apologized profusely, but Adrian dismissed him with a flick of his hand, as if swatting away an insect. His entourage laughed nervously, unsure if they should find the moment amusing or terrifying. And then Adrian's eyes landed on Daniel. The waiter was approaching cautiously, holding a tray of drinks for the group. His steps were careful, his hands steady despite the weight he carried. He had done this countless times before. Yet tonight, fate had its own plan. As Daniel set the glasses down on the polished table, one slipped, just slightly, tilting against another before he quickly steadied it. Nothing spilled, nothing broke, but Adrian's face twisted as if he had just witnessed the greatest offense of his life. Unbelievable, Adrian sneered, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Even a simple task like carrying drinks is too much for you people. Do you have any idea how much this suit costs? If a single drop had touched me, do you even make in a year what I paid for this tie? Laughter rippled through his entourage. Nervous, shallow laughter. The kind that fed his ego. Daniel froze for a second. His eyes lowered, his lips pressed together. He wanted to apologize, though he had done nothing wrong. It was instinct. Years of being trained to bow. To say, "I'm sorry, sir," even when the mistake wasn't his. But something in him hesitated. Adrian leaned closer, his tone sharp and mocking. "Tell me, waiter, do you even know who I am? Or do you spend your life scrubbing floors and hoping for tips?" The lobby grew quieter. Guests turned their heads, sensing a spectacle. Staff froze, too afraid to intervene. Daniel felt the weight of every eye on him. The humiliation burned like fire in his chest. Yet he stood still, calm, silent. And then, with a voice barely above a whisper but firm enough to carry, he replied, "I know exactly who you are, sir. The question is, do you know where you are?" The words hung in the air like smoke. Adrian blinked, taken aback by the audacity. His entourage chuckled again, but this time with uncertainty. Daniel didn't explain. He didn't need to. He simply straightened the last glass on the tray, gave a polite nod, and stepped back. His silence was louder than any insult could have been. Adrian scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Pathetic. Go back to doing what you do best, serving people who actually matter." But as the night unfolded, as Adrian laughed and boasted and ordered the most expensive wine, a truth lingered in the shadows of that hotel. A truth that would soon turn his arrogance into regret. Because Daniel was not just a waiter, and Adrian was about to find out exactly who owned the ground he walked on. The evening carried on, but the atmosphere in the hotel had shifted. Though most guests went back to their conversations and the soft hum of the piano returned, a quiet unease lingered. Staff members exchanged cautious glances, while Daniel continued his duties with the same quiet dignity he had shown for years. Yet inside him, a storm brewed. Not of anger, not of rage, but of resolve. For men like Adrian Cole, insults were currency. He threw them around to remind others of their place, to stamp his authority in every room he entered. But Daniel had endured worse in his life. His patience was not weakness. It was strength that had been forged through years of hardship. Still, the sting of Adrian's words echoed in his chest. "Do you even know who I am?" Daniel's reply, calm and cryptic, had unsettled Adrian more than he admitted. For a brief moment, those words rattled his confidence. But arrogance is a thick shield. He convinced himself the waiter was just trying to sound clever. He laughed it off, drowning the moment in wine and boasting to his entourage about billion-dollar deals and global expansions. But the universe has a peculiar way of weaving justice into ordinary nights. Adrian raised his glass, smirking. "Gentlemen, this is how you live. Not like peasants scraping for pennies. This is power. This is success." His assistants nodded vigorously, though their eyes betrayed discomfort. They knew their boss's temper, and they knew better than to cross him. Yet they also couldn't ignore the shame of being part of the mockery. A few tables away, a family sat quietly, parents and their teenage son, dressed modestly but carrying an air of quiet pride. They watched the scene unfold with disapproval. The boy whispered, "Why is he talking to the waiter like that?" His mother hushed him, but her eyes softened as they fell on Daniel, who carried himself as though the insult had not broken him. The boy didn't know it yet, but tonight's lesson would stay with him for life. Hours passed. The wine bottles emptied. The laughter grew louder. Adrian's voice boomed across the lobby, a performance for everyone who dared to watch. He ordered the most expensive dishes, barely touching the food, simply enjoying the knowledge that others could see him waste what they could never afford. And then came the moment that sealed his fate. "Waiter!" Adrian snapped his fingers. The sound cracked through the air like a whip. Daniel turned, carrying himself with the same quiet composure. He approached the table, hands folded respectfully. "Yes, sir." Adrian leaned back in his chair, his smirk widening. "Tell me, do you enjoy being invisible? Spending your life cleaning up after men like me? Carrying trays, bowing, apologizing. Is that your dream? Or did life just crush you until this was all you had left? The entourage chuckled again. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Even the pianist's fingers hesitated on the keys. The cruelty of the words weighed on the room like thick smoke. But Daniel did not flinch. His voice was steady, his eyes calm. Sir, every role in life has dignity. Service is not weakness. Sometimes, the ones who bow have more strength than those who demand it. The words struck like lightning. Adrian's smirk faltered, then returned with sharper venom. Spare me your philosophy. You're a nobody, a servant, and men like me. He gestured grandly to himself. We are the ones who shape the world. Daniel gave the slightest smile. Not mocking, not bitter, just a smile filled with quiet knowing. The world has a way of reminding us who truly holds power, sir. You may be surprised. The remark was too much for Adrian's ego. He slammed his glass down, the wine sloshing dangerously close to spilling. Enough. If it weren't for this hotel's reputation, I'd have you thrown out into the street where you belong. Men like me don't waste time on men like you. His voice carried through the lobby. Some guests lowered their heads, embarrassed for him. Others whispered among themselves. The staff stood frozen, afraid to intervene. Daniel bowed slightly, as was his duty, but his calmness unsettled Adrian more than any argument could. There was no anger, no desperation, only composure, as if Daniel knew something Adrian didn't. And indeed he did, for Daniel was not just a waiter. Hours later, as the night wound down, Adrian demanded to speak with the hotel manager. He wanted to complain about the incompetent staff, making a spectacle of his grievances. The manager, a polite man in his 40s, listened patiently, apologizing for the inconvenience. But before he could offer compensation, another figure entered the lobby. The air shifted instantly. Staff members straightened. Guests turned. Even the pianist stopped mid-note. Daniel had returned, but not in his waiter's uniform. He wore a tailored suit, elegant and commanding, his presence suddenly impossible to ignore. The same man Adrian had mocked now carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who belonged at the very top. Adrian's laughter caught in his throat. His eyes widened. What is this? The manager stepped aside respectfully. Sir, allow me to introduce Mr. Daniel Hayes, the owner of this hotel. The words landed like thunder. Silence blanketed the lobby. Every eye turned to Adrian, whose face drained of color. His entourage shifted uncomfortably, realizing the tables had turned in the most spectacular way. Daniel's eyes met Adrian's. Calm, steady, no gloating, no anger, only truth. You asked me if I knew who you were, Mr. Cole, but the real question was whether you knew where you were standing. This is my hotel. The humiliation struck Adrian harder than any insult could. The very man he had mocked, belittled, and dismissed as a nobody was the one who owned the ground beneath his feet. Gasps rippled through the guests. The family from earlier exchanged knowing looks. The teenage boy's eyes lit up, the lesson clear as day. The world was not as simple as power and titles. Dignity mattered. Respect mattered. Humanity mattered. Adrian stammered, his arrogance crumbling. I didn't know. Daniel raised a hand, silencing him with grace. Respect should not depend on who someone is. It should not be reserved for the rich, the powerful, or the known. True respect is shown to everyone, regardless of their place in life. That is the difference between those who lead with arrogance and those who lead with honor. The entire lobby was silent, hanging on every word. Adrian's entourage avoided his eyes, ashamed to be associated with him. Adrian tried to recover, forcing a laugh. Well, Mr. Hayes, I suppose this is quite the surprise. Surely, we can put this behind us. Daniel's gaze sharpened, though his tone remained calm. Some insults can be forgiven, but the way you treat others reveals who you are when the masks come off. Tonight, you didn't insult me. You insulted every man and woman who serves, who works hard, who carries dignity in silence. And that, Mr. Cole, is not something easily forgotten. The weight of the words crushed Adrian's pride. For the first time in years, he was speechless. And as Daniel turned to walk away, the lobby erupted into quiet murmurs. Some guests smiled. Others shook their heads at Adrian's disgrace. But one thing was certain. The balance of power had shifted. Adrian Cole, the man who thought himself untouchable, had been brought to his knees. Not by force, not by wealth, but by truth. The moment Daniel revealed himself as the hotel's owner, the air in the lobby turned electric. It was as if the very walls of marble and glass leaned in to listen, as though the chandeliers themselves wanted to witness the unmasking of arrogance. Adrian stood frozen, his face pale, his lips trembling, the once mighty So reduced to silence. His entourage shifted uneasily in their seats, caught between loyalty and shame. They had followed his laughter, his arrogance, his cruelty. But now, the man they had bowed to looked suddenly very small. The silence stretched. Seconds felt like hours. Then came the whispers. Guests leaned into each other, murmuring in awe. The waiter is the owner. He owns the hotel. Did you hear what he said to him? The story was already spreading through the crowd like wildfire, a living tale that would travel beyond these walls. Adrian tried to steady himself, smoothing the front of his suit. He forced a laugh, brittle, nervous. Well, this is unexpected. I admit, you surprised me, Mr. Hayes. A fine act of humility, I'll give you that. But surely, you can understand a man like me was simply expecting. Daniel interrupted, his voice calm, steady, but carrying an authority that silenced the room. A man like you? His words echoed, deliberate, heavy with meaning. What exactly is a man like you, Mr. Cole? The question was not rhetorical. It was a mirror held up to Adrian's soul. Adrian's lips parted, but no answer came. His usual arsenal of clever phrases, boardroom dominance, and press-polished words deserted him. For the first time in years, he had no script. Daniel stepped closer, his presence filling the space without aggression, only quiet gravity. I'll tell you what I see. I see a man who confuses wealth with worth. A man who mistakes fear for respect. A man who believes his suit and his title make him greater than those who serve him. But true greatness, Mr. Cole, is measured by how you treat those who cannot fight back. Tonight, you revealed who you really are. The words cut deeper than any insult. They were not shouted. They were not cruel. They were truth delivered with dignity. And truth has a way of piercing armor arrogance cannot withstand. Guests sat spellbound. The teenage boy from earlier clutched his mother's arm, his eyes wide. This was not just a scene. This was a lesson unfolding before him, one that no classroom could ever teach. Adrian's face burned red, shame clawing at him. But pride, stubborn and desperate, pushed him to respond. You think this means anything? So you own one hotel. I run an empire. My name carries weight in every city I walk into. And yet, Daniel interjected softly. All it took was a tray of glasses to reveal your empire rests on sand. The room gasped, not from volume, but from the quiet sting of the truth. Adrian's mouth opened and closed, like a man drowning with no air to cling to. Daniel turned, addressing not just Adrian, but everyone present. Let this night remind us, dignity is not for sale. Respect is not reserved for the powerful. Every person who works, whether carrying trays, cleaning floors, or signing contracts, carries value. The true test of character is not how you treat your equals, but how you treat those you believe are beneath you. It was as if the entire lobby exhaled at once. People nodded. Some clapped quietly, hesitant but moved. The pianist, who had stopped earlier, began to play again, a softer, slower tune, as though echoing the weight of Daniel's words. Adrian's entourage shrank back, unable to look their boss in the eye. The illusion of his invincibility had shattered. Adrian, desperate to salvage pride, leaned forward. His voice cracked with forced bravado. Do you think this makes you better than me? You embarrass me in front of everyone. You think they'll remember your words? I control the headlines, the deals, the money. Tomorrow, no one will care about tonight. Daniel's reply was a whisper, but it carried louder than any shout. Tomorrow, they may forget the details, but they will never forget how you made them feel. The teenage boy smiled, clutching his mother's hand tighter. The family knew, in that instant, they had witnessed something rare. The moment arrogance bowed to humility. Adrian's power in the room was gone. No amount of money, no title, no empire could erase what had just happened. The world had tilted, and everyone knew it. The lobby had not returned to normal. It couldn't. Something irreversible had happened. Where once Adrian Cole's booming laughter commanded the air, now silence lingered. Heavy, suffocating, unforgettable. The staff moved more confidently now, no longer shrinking in fear of his glare. Guests, once too cautious to meet his eyes, now studied him openly, as though seeing him for the very first time. And Adrian felt it. The shift, the quiet collapse of the pedestal he had built for himself. But men like Adrian don't give up power easily. His pride, cracked and bleeding, still fought to hold its ground. He rose from his chair, smoothing his suit with trembling hands, and forced a grin as if nothing had happened. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced loudly, his voice wobbling but determined, "let's not get carried away. A simple misunderstanding, that's all. A little entertainment for the evening." He chuckled, hollow and desperate, scanning the room for agreement. But no laughter came back. Even his entourage, those who once laughed at every cruel remark, sat motionless, eyes downcast. The echo of Daniel's words still held them captive. Daniel, standing with quiet composure, did not interrupt. He did not need to. The truth has a way of speaking even in silence. Adrian cleared his throat, lowering his voice, trying to salvage dignity. "Mr. Hayes, I admit, I may have been harsh, but surely a man of your position can understand. I'm under constant pressure, constantly watched. Sometimes words slip. Surely we can move past this." His tone had changed. The arrogance had softened, replaced with a plea for mercy, though still wrapped in ego. He wanted Daniel to absolve him publicly, to hand him back the respect he had squandered. But Daniel's expression remained unchanged. Calm, steady, unreadable. "This is not about me, Mr. Cole. It never was. Tonight, you revealed how you see the world, and the world saw it too." The words struck deeper than any insult. Adrian's facade cracked further. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but his usual weapons, authority, money, intimidation, had no effect here. None. The teenage boy from earlier leaned closer to his mother, whispering, "He can't win. Can he?" His mother shook her head softly, her eyes fixed on Daniel. "No, son, not this time." Adrian's desperation grew. He turned toward the guests, spreading his arms as if to appeal to them directly. "You all know me. You've seen my work, my success. I build businesses, I create jobs, I drive progress. I'm not the villain here." But no applause followed. The crowd's silence was louder than condemnation. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low but unwavering. "You may build businesses, but tonight you tore down respect. You may create jobs, but you destroyed dignity. Progress means nothing if it tramples on people." The pianist, almost instinctively, shifted into a somber tune, his fingers pressing each key like a heartbeat beneath the tension. The music framed Daniel's words, amplifying their weight. Adrian's mask of confidence shattered. His voice trembled. "You think you've humiliated me, but I could destroy this place. My company has influence. I can make sure this hotel never sees another corporate deal. You'll regret this, Hayes." Gasps filled the lobby. His threat was desperate, reckless. The man who once prided himself on control had lost it entirely. Daniel stepped forward, unflinching, his eyes locked onto Adrian's. "Do you hear yourself? Even now, when all you need to do is look in the mirror, you cling to threats. That is not strength, Mr. Cole. That is fear, and fear is the language of the weak." The words struck like thunder. Adrian staggered back slightly, as though they had physically hit him. His entourage shifted further away, embarrassed to even share his shadow. And then, in a voice softer than the music, but stronger than any command, Daniel added, "You don't need to fear me. You need to fear yourself. Because when the applause fades and the money disappears, the only thing left is who you truly are. And tonight, The world saw it clearly. The room was silent once more. Silent, but not empty. It was filled with something heavier than any speech, truth. For Adrian, the silence was unbearable. He felt it clawing at him, suffocating him, reminding him that the empire he had built on arrogance had crumbled in a single night, in front of strangers, in front of his own men. His chest tightened. His breaths came shallow. This wasn't just humiliation anymore. It was unraveling. He sank back in his chair, his head in his hands. For the first time in years, Adrian Cole, the mighty CEO, the feared lion of boardrooms, looked small. Not because someone else had defeated him, but because he had finally been forced to face himself. Daniel did not gloat. He did not smile. He simply gave a respectful nod to the staff, acknowledging their worth with a gesture Adrian had never offered. Then, with calm steps, he began to leave. But before he reached the doors, he turned one last time, his voice steady but final. Mr. Cole, power is not how loudly people laugh at your jokes, but how quietly they respect your silence. Tonight, you learn the difference. I hope, for your sake, you don't forget it. And with that, he walked out, leaving Adrian in the ruins of his own arrogance, leaving the guests with a story they would carry for years, and leaving the boy with a lesson he would never forget. Time passed, but the memory of that night in the hotel lobby did not fade. Stories like that never do. They root themselves in people's hearts because they reveal something greater than wealth, greater than power. They reveal truth. For the guests who witnessed it, the night became more than an evening out. It became a story they retold to their families, a lesson they carried into their own lives. The teenage boy who watched Adrian's downfall told the story to his classmates, his voice carrying the awe of a child who had seen the mask of arrogance torn away. His mother reminded him, always respect people, no matter their job, no matter their clothes. You never know who they are, and even if you did, respect is never wasted. For the hotel staff, that night was vindication. Years of silent service, of swallowing insults, of being invisible, suddenly transformed into pride. They realized their dignity did not depend on tips or titles, but on who they were inside. Daniel had shown them that with a single act of truth. And for Adrian Cole, the story became his shadow. Every board meeting, every investor call, every social gathering. He could feel the whispers. He could see the look in people's eyes, the unspoken reminder of the night he mocked a waiter and was brought to his knees. But within that shadow, a small light began to flicker. Reflection. He replayed Daniel's words over and over in his mind. Respect should not depend on who someone is. True respect is shown to everyone. At first, those words were daggers. They cut at his pride, his image, his carefully crafted mask. But as days turned into weeks, the daggers became chisels, carving away the stone around his heart. He began to notice the people he had once ignored. The janitor sweeping the hallways of his office building. The driver who waited quietly in the car. The receptionist who greeted every guest with a smile. He had always seen them as background noise, invisible parts of his world. But now, for the first time, he saw them as people. And in their faces, he saw dignity. The same dignity Daniel had carried that night. It was not an overnight transformation. Pride dies slowly, clawing for survival. But little by little, Adrian began to change. He listened more. He softened his tone. He caught himself before his arrogance slipped out. He was still a CEO, still powerful, still wealthy, but now he was something else too, aware. The world did not forgive him instantly. Respect lost is not easily regained. But in the quiet moments, Adrian found something he had not felt in years. Peace. Because for the first time, he was not pretending to be powerful. He was learning to be human. And Daniel? He never spoke of the incident again. He did not need to. His life continued as it always had, with humility, with quiet leadership, with dignity. For him, the lesson was not about proving someone wrong. It was about reminding everyone, guests, staff, strangers, even Adrian, that respect is the foundation of humanity. And that is the moral of this story. Rose's respect is not a privilege reserved for the wealthy, the powerful, or the famous. Respect is a birthright owed to every human being simply because they exist, Rose arrogance may build empires, but it also builds walls. Walls that collapse the moment truth touches them. Rose's true strength is not in how loudly you demand obedience, but in how quietly you offer kindness. Rose, and perhaps the most important lesson of all, you never know who you are speaking to. The stranger you belittle, the worker you mock, the nobody you ignore. They may hold more power, more wisdom, and more dignity than you could ever imagine. The boy who witnessed that night grew into a man who treated everyone he met with respect. The staff carried pride in their work, knowing their value was beyond measure. And even Adrian, the fallen CEO, carried the scar of that night as a reminder to be better. And you, the one listening right now, you too have a choice. Every day, in the way you speak to others, in the way you treat those who serve you, in the way you see the invisible, you write your story. Will it be a story of arrogance, remembered for cruelty? Or will it be a story of dignity, remembered for kindness? Because in the end, it is not your title, not your wealth, not your power that defines you. It is how you treat people who can give you nothing in return. So the next time you step into a hotel, a restaurant, a shop, or simply cross paths with a stranger, remember this story. Remember Adrian. Remember Daniel. And choose respect. Always.